The billionaire tech world laughed when the quiet woman asked for the microphone. 8 minutes later, half the people in that convention hall wished they had never opened their mouths. The glass walls of the San Francisco Innovation Summit reflected streaks of cold blue light across the packed convention center as hundreds of executives, engineers, startup founders, and investors filled the massive auditorium. Giant LED screens towered over the stage, displaying the glowing silver logo of Reed Dynamics, the hottest artificial intelligence company in America. Every seat in the hall had been sold out for weeks. Outside, black SUVs lined the curb while reporters crowded near the entrance hoping to catch a glimpse of Nathaniel Reed, the billionaire founder the media had crowned the future of AI. Inside the hall, conversations buzzed with nervous ambition. Young founders adjusted expensive jackets. Venture capitalists checked phones glowing with stock updates. Influencers whispered into cameras while live streams rolled across social media. Everyone wanted proximity to power. And at the very back row, unnoticed by almost everyone in the room, sat Claire Bennett. She wore a dark gray cardigan over a plain black blouse, with a visitor badge hanging quietly against her chest. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders, simple and unstyled compared to the polished appearance surrounding her. She carried no designer bag. No assistant followed behind her. Nobody turned to look twice. One volunteer nearly blocked her from entering earlier, assuming she had wandered into the wrong ballroom. Claire never argued. She simply thanked him softly and walked to the back alone. The conference lights dimmed suddenly. A low cinematic soundtrack rolled through the speakers as smoke drifted across the stage floor. Then the crowd erupted into applause. Nathaniel Reed emerged beneath a spotlight wearing a tailored navy suit and a wireless microphone wrapped neatly around his jaw. He smiled with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said dramatically, the man redefining artificial intelligence. The applause became deafening. Phones lifted instantly into the air. Nathaniel raised one hand modestly, though the satisfaction in his expression was impossible to miss. Claire watched silently from the back as giant screens magnified his face 20 feet high above the audience. For the last 7 years, Nathaniel began smoothly. The world has been asking what comes next after AI. Tonight, we answer that question. The audience leaned forward immediately. Every word felt rehearsed to perfection. Every pause calculated. On stage behind him, engineers in black Reed Dynamics jackets monitored a sleek demonstration terminal glowing beneath white light. Nathaniel paced slowly across the stage as massive graphics displayed phrases like adaptive learning, self-evolving memory, and human-level reasoning. The room hung on every sentence. But Claire's expression never changed. Her eyes remained fixed not on Nathaniel, but on the system architecture diagram rotating slowly across the screen behind him. At first glance it looked flawless, elegant even, but then her gaze narrowed slightly, just slightly. Her fingers tightened around the conference notebook resting in her lap, because hidden inside the presentation was something almost nobody else in that room could have recognized. A structural flaw buried deep inside the adaptive memory framework. The kind of flaw that did not create small problems. The kind that could corrupt medical triage data, misread an autonomous vehicle fleet command, or turn a trusted safety system into a beautiful lie. Nathaniel smiled proudly beneath the stage lights. "This," he announced confidently, "is the safest and most advanced AI architecture ever created." And somewhere near the back row, Claire Bennett slowly looked up for the first time. The presentation continued beneath pulsing blue lights as Nathaniel Reed moved confidently across the massive stage, his polished voice echoing through the convention hall with the precision of someone who had spent years learning how to command admiration. Every sentence landed perfectly. Every slide triggered applause. Investors nodded approvingly while journalists typed headlines before the demonstration had even ended. Reed Dynamics was not just a company anymore. It had become a symbol of power in the tech world, and Nathaniel knew exactly how to use that power. Claire Bennett remained silent in the back row, though her attention never drifted from the architecture diagrams rotating behind him. The adaptive memory system looked impressive to outsiders, but she recognized patterns hidden beneath the surface. Small inconsistencies, familiar structures, familiar enough to make her stomach tighten. She had seen those same recursive pathways years earlier on a whiteboard covered in black marker inside a tiny office south of Market Street. Back when Reed Dynamics was still a struggling startup operating above a laundromat with folding tables instead of glass offices. Back when Nathaniel Reed had not yet learned how to smile for cameras. Claire lowered her eyes briefly as fragments of memory returned without invitation. Long nights filled with cold coffee and glowing monitors. Endless debates about ethics and machine learning. Engineers sleeping beneath desks while trying to build something revolutionary without compromising safety. She remembered believing they were building technology that could genuinely help people. She also remembered the meeting that changed everything. The investors had wanted acceleration, faster deployment, fewer safeguards, more profit. Nathaniel agreed almost immediately. Claire did not. Even now she could still hear his calm voice from 7 years earlier. People do not pay for caution, he had told her. They pay for innovation. Claire had walked away from the company less than 2 months later. Publicly, Reed Dynamics claimed she resigned because of burnout. Privately, most employees were told she simply could not keep up with the company's vision. Nathaniel never corrected the narrative. The giant screen behind him shifted suddenly to a live demonstration environment. Applause spread through the auditorium again as the artificial intelligence system began processing real-time user prompts from audience members. Nathaniel grinned confidently. No scripts, he announced proudly. No prepared responses. Adaptive. Intelligence in real time. The audience loved it. Questions appeared on the screen. The system answered instantly with smooth precision. Laughter rippled through the crowd as the AI delivered charming responses mixed with technical brilliance. Camera drones floated silently through the air, capturing every reaction for the live stream. But Claire noticed something else. A subtle delay buried inside the memory synchronization layer. Barely noticeable. Less than half a second. Most engineers would never catch it. Her fingers slowly tightened around the edge of her notebook. Because she knew exactly what caused that kind of delay. And she knew what eventually followed. The system was not stabilizing memory adaptation. It was suppressing recursive overload temporarily to maintain the illusion of stability during demonstrations. Her breathing slowed carefully. Nathaniel was gambling with a catastrophic collapse pattern he clearly believed nobody else in the room could identify. Then one of the lower corner dashboards flashed past for less than a second, listing pilot partners already connected to the demonstration branch, a hospital diagnostics network, a municipal traffic lab, and an autonomous vehicle consortium scheduled for beta integration. Claire felt the old anger rise, but underneath it was something colder and cleaner. If she stayed silent tonight, this would not remain a frozen screen at a conference. It would leave the room. This architecture changes everything, Nathaniel declared proudly as applause filled the hall once more. Claire looked around quietly at the cheering crowd. Young programmers stared at the stage with admiration. Investors whispered excitedly about future valuations. Influencers pointed cameras toward Nathaniel like he was a celebrity stepping onto a movie premiere. Nobody questioned him. Nobody even considered questioning him. And that was exactly why people like Nathaniel Reed became dangerous. Then another slide appeared on the screen behind him. System Architect, Nathaniel Reed. Claire stared at the words in silence. Her expression did not change. But somewhere deep behind her calm eyes, something finally shifted. The applause. Inside the convention hall rolled like thunder beneath the towering speakers as Nathaniel Reed stepped toward the center of the stage again, feeding off the energy of the crowd with practiced ease. Behind him, the giant LED display shifted into sleek animated graphics showing projected growth charts, global expansion maps, and headlines calling Reed Dynamics the future of artificial intelligence. Every screen in the building seemed designed to make him appear larger than life. "We are no longer talking about simple machine learning," Nathaniel announced confidently. "We are talking about technology capable of evolving beyond human limitation." The audience erupted again. Claire Bennett sat motionless in the back row while the glow from the stage lights reflected faintly across her face. Around her, people nodded with admiration. Some whispered predictions about billion-dollar acquisitions. Others hurried to post clips online before the keynote even finished. But Claire barely noticed any of it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the adaptive memory diagram still rotating slowly behind Nathaniel. Because the flaw was getting worse. The live system was compensating harder now. Tiny delays. Minor recalculations. Hidden instability spreading beneath the polished surface like cracks beneath ice. Then Nathaniel smiled toward the audience. I know some people still fear artificial intelligence, he said smoothly. That is because they do not fully understand it. Laughter drifted through the hall. Nathaniel paused confidently before continuing. Fear usually comes from people who lack the expertise to recognize progress when they see it. More laughter followed. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. 7 years earlier, Nathaniel had spoken almost those exact same words during a private investor meeting. Back then, she had challenged him directly after discovering instability during long-term adaptive recursion tests. She had warned him that removing the safety layers could eventually trigger memory collapse under heavy load conditions. Nathaniel ignored her. The investors sided with him. Profit moved faster than caution. Claire still remembered packing her office alone that night, while engineers avoided eye contact in the hallway. For years, she had told herself that walking away was the only honest choice left. But watching those pilot integrations blink across the dashboard now, she understood that silence had become its own kind of permission. Reed Dynamics erased her quietly after that. No scandal, no dramatic headlines, just silence. Nathaniel's voice pulled her back to the present. Tonight, he announced proudly, we are opening the floor for live technical questions. The room immediately stirred with excitement. Several audience members rushed towards standing microphones placed near the aisles while moderators prepared tablets to filter submissions from livestream viewers. Nathaniel looked completely comfortable, untouchable even. Claire watched carefully as the first engineer asked about scalability. Nathaniel answered smoothly. Another developer asked about enterprise integration. Again, perfect confidence. The audience applauded after nearly every response. It felt less like a technical conference and more like a performance. Then Claire slowly stood from the back row. At first, nobody noticed. She waited quietly near the final standing microphone while several younger attendees glanced at her with mild confusion. One man wearing a startup hoodie stepped aside politely, clearly assuming she had entered the wrong line. Claire said nothing. Her visitor badge swung lightly against her cardigan as she reached the microphone stand near the rear aisle. Up on stage, Nathaniel pointed toward her section casually. Yes, he said with a charming smile. The lady in the back. A spotlight snapped across the dark auditorium instantly, washing Claire in harsh white light. Hundreds of faces turned toward her at once. The room suddenly felt very still. Claire adjusted the microphone carefully with steady hands. Her voice, when it came, sounded calm, quiet, controlled. Did your team test recursive memory collapse under sustained adaptive load balancing? The entire auditorium paused. Several engineers stopped typing. Nathaniel's smile froze for half a second before returning. Claire continued softly. Because your synchronization latency appears to be suppressing instability rather than resolving it. A faint murmur spread through the crowd. Somewhere near the front rows, a few engineers exchanged confused looks. Nathaniel stared toward the back of the hall beneath the blazing stage lights, and for the first time that night, the confidence in his expression flickered ever so slightly. For one brief moment, the massive convention hall lost its rhythm. The glowing screens continued moving behind Nathaniel Reed while the audience sat suspended in a strange silence that had not existed anywhere inside the building all night. Several engineers near the front rows exchanged uncertain glances. One moderator lowered his tablet slowly. Even the live stream chat projected on the side monitors slowed as viewers tried to process the question they had just heard. Nathaniel remained perfectly still beneath the stage lights, though his jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then he smiled again. Smooth, controlled, dangerous. Well, he said lightly, adjusting the microphone against his collar. That is certainly a dramatic way to phrase a question. Nervous laughter scattered through the audience. Claire Bennett stood quietly near the back microphone, one hand resting calmly against the stand while hundreds of strangers stared toward her beneath the spotlight. Nathaniel took a slow step forward. Recursive memory collapse, he repeated with theatrical amusement. That is a fairly advanced concern. More laughter followed, louder this time. A few people turned around toward Claire with smirks forming across their faces. Nathaniel glanced briefly toward the audience before speaking again. May I ask what company you are with? Claire answered calmly. I am not currently affiliated with one. The reaction was immediate. Several attendees chuckled openly now. One influencer near the front whispered something to his camera while grinning. Nathaniel nodded slowly, as if confirming a private suspicion. I see. He paced casually across the stage while giant blue graphics glowed behind him like moving waves of light. You know, artificial intelligence conferences tend to attract people who read a few online articles and suddenly think they understand highly specialized systems. More laughter erupted through the hall. Claire did not react. Her expression remained steady beneath the harsh white spotlight. Nathaniel looked toward the crowd with perfect timing, feeding off their energy. This architecture, he continued confidently, gesturing toward the massive display behind him, was designed by some of the most advanced engineers in the world. Applause broke out instantly. Not internet theorists. The audience laughed again, louder now. Somewhere near the center rows, somebody clapped mockingly. Claire lowered her eyes for half a second as the noise rolled across the auditorium. But she never stepped away from the microphone. Nathaniel noticed that immediately. His smile thinned slightly. Let me guess, he said casually. You watched a few technical podcasts and decided to challenge a live system demonstration? More laughter exploded throughout the room. The livestream chat beside the stage began flooding rapidly with comments. Who is she? Some random attendee. This is painful. Cameras zoomed tighter toward Claire's face while the convention lights reflected against the polished floor around her. Nathaniel leaned slightly closer toward the audience. Ma'am, he said with exaggerated politeness, this is an advanced artificial intelligence summit. His words landed exactly how he intended. The crowd burst into laughter again, louder than before. Several people shook their heads sympathetically toward Claire as though watching someone embarrass herself publicly. One conference staff member near the aisle quietly began moving closer to her section. Nathaniel smiled broadly beneath the thunder of applause. He believed he had regained complete control of the room. But then something subtle happened. One engineer seated near the front frowned while staring at the architecture diagram behind Nathaniel. Another slowly reopened his laptop. A third stopped laughing altogether. Because despite Nathaniel's performance, the question itself still lingered in the air. Recursive memory collapse. Sustained adaptive load balancing. Synchronization suppression. These were not random buzzwords. Thrown together by an uninformed attendee. The language had been too precise. Too exact. Nathaniel sensed the shift almost immediately. His eyes flickered briefly toward Claire again. She still stood there quietly beneath the spotlight, calm as stone while the crowd laughed around her. And somehow, that silence unsettled him far more than anger ever could. The laughter inside the auditorium slowly faded into scattered murmurs as Nathaniel Reed turned back toward the giant display behind him, trying to pull the energy of the room away from Claire Bennett and back toward himself. His smile remained polished, but something colder had entered his eyes now. He no longer saw her as merely awkward. He saw her as inconvenient. Anyway, Nathaniel said smoothly, brushing off the moment with a casual wave of his hand. Back to the actual experts. A few people laughed again, though less confidently this time. The atmosphere had shifted in ways most attendees could not fully explain. Engineers near the front rows were no longer smiling as much. Several had reopened technical dashboards on their laptops while quietly replaying portions of the live demonstration feed. Claire remained standing silently beneath the spotlight at the back microphone. She made no effort to defend herself. No angry reaction. No embarrassment. Just stillness. And somehow that composure continued to unsettle the room more with every passing second. Nathaniel glanced toward one of his lead engineers seated near the side stage. The man avoided eye contact immediately. A tiny detail, barely noticeable, but Nathaniel noticed it. He stepped toward the center of the stage again, forcing confidence back into his posture. As I was saying, he continued, our adaptive architecture has already surpassed every existing industry benchmark. The giant screen behind him shifted into another live demonstration. Complex streams of code scrolled across the display while animated neural pathways pulsed in electric blue. The audience applauded politely. Yet the applause sounded thinner now, less certain. Claire watched the synchronization metrics carefully from the back of the hall. The instability was accelerating beneath the system load. She could see it in the timing fluctuations hidden inside the visualized memory transfers. Nathaniel either did not recognize it yet or believed he could outpace it long enough to finish the presentation. Both possibilities were dangerous. Then a young engineer seated 3 rows from the stage slowly raised his hand. Nathaniel pointed toward him immediately, eager to move forward. Question, the engineer asked carefully. Has the team published any external validation data for long-term recursive adaptation stability? The room shifted again. Another engineer nearby looked up from her laptop. Then another. Nathaniel's smile tightened almost invisibly. Our internal testing exceeds current industry standards, he answered quickly. Right, the engineer replied slowly. But has independent verification been completed? Silence flickered briefly through the hall. Nathaniel gave a short laugh. You sound as skeptical as our guest in the back. A few people chuckled politely, but the humor no longer landed the same way. Claire noticed something important then. Nathaniel was no longer addressing the technical concern itself. He was redirecting attention toward personalities, toward status, toward humiliation. It was the same tactic he used years earlier inside investor meetings whenever engineers challenged timelines or ethics concerns. Attack confidence, undermine credibility, make the room fear disagreement. Nathaniel walked slowly across the stage while cameras followed him overhead. Look, he said confidently. Technology moves forward because innovators take risks. If we listened to every fearful voice in the room, humanity would still be using flip phones. Some laughter returned, but weaker now. Nathaniel pointed casually toward Claire again. With respect, he added smoothly, there is a reason complex systems are designed by professionals with years of specialized experience. Claire finally spoke again. Quietly. I know. The words were soft, but something about them cut clean through the room. Nathaniel paused. The audience grew still again. Claire looked directly toward the stage beneath the burning white spotlight. I designed the original memory framework. The silence that followed felt sudden and absolute. Even the camera drones hovering above the crowd seemed to stop moving. The silence that swallowed the convention hall felt almost unnatural. Thousands of people sat frozen beneath the cold blue lights while Claire Bennett remained standing quietly at the back microphone, her simple gray cardigan illuminated beneath the harsh white spotlight. On stage, Nathaniel Reed did not move for nearly 2 full seconds. But in rooms built on ego and power, 2 seconds could feel like an eternity. Somewhere near the front rows, somebody whispered, "Wait." Claire Bennett. Another engineer slowly turned toward the stage with widened eyes. A woman seated beside the media section grabbed her phone and began typing furiously. Nathaniel recovered first. Of course he did. Men like him survive by controlling narratives faster than truth could catch them. He laughed lightly into the microphone and spread his hands with polished confidence. Claire, he said smoothly, as though greeting an old colleague unexpectedly at a dinner party instead of standing in the middle of a collapsing presentation. I almost did not recognize you. Nervous laughter scattered weakly through the audience. Claire said nothing. Nathaniel paced slowly across the stage, carefully rebuilding control 1 sentence at a time. Claire was briefly involved during Reed Dynamics' early development phase years ago, he explained casually. Very early phase. The way he emphasized the words felt deliberate, reducing, dismissing. Of course, he continued with a charming smile. The system evolved dramatically after that. Some audience members nodded uncertainly, relieved to follow his lead again. Nathaniel pointed toward the massive display behind him. What you are seeing tonight represents thousands of hours from hundreds of engineers. Applause returned softly. Claire listened quietly while the crowd searched for emotional safety inside Nathaniel's confidence. But she also noticed something else happening beneath the surface. Engineers were no longer watching Nathaniel alone. They were watching the system metrics. The synchronization delays were increasing visibly now. Small warning indicators flickered briefly inside back-end monitoring windows before disappearing again. Nathaniel either had not noticed yet or was pretending not to notice. Claire could not tell which possibility frightened her more. Then one of the lead engineers near the side stage suddenly stood and whispered urgently to another technician. Their faces had lost all color. Nathaniel noticed immediately. His expression tightened for the briefest moment before smoothing over again. Everything is fine, he announced confidently into the microphone before anyone had even asked. Minor calibration adjustments. But the room had already begun changing. Investors stopped smiling. Journalists leaned forward sharply. Livestream comments exploded across the side displays faster than moderators could filter them. Is the system failing? Who is Claire Bennett? Did she build this? Claire watched quietly as fear began replacing admiration inside the room. Nathaniel turned toward her again, and now the warmth had vanished entirely from his voice. If you truly believe there is an issue, he said carefully, perhaps you would like to explain your theory to the audience. The challenge hung in the air like a trap. Several attendees glanced toward Claire with curiosity mixed against lingering skepticism. Nathaniel smiled thinly beneath the stage lights. He still believed status would protect him. After all, he was Nathaniel Reed, billionaire founder, media icon, visionary, and Claire looked like an exhausted office worker standing in borrowed light. But Nathaniel had forgotten something dangerous about truly intelligent people. They do not need to dominate rooms to understand them. Claire slowly stepped away from the microphone stand. For 1 second, the audience thought she might leave. Instead, she began walking calmly down the center aisle toward the stage. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished convention floor while thousands of eyes followed her in complete silence. One young engineer near the stairs stared at her visitor badge again before suddenly freezing mid-movement. Recognition hit him all at once. "Oh my God," he whispered under his breath. "She really is Claire Bennett." Nathaniel's confident expression flickered again as Claire approached the stage beneath the towering blue lights. Because deep down, somewhere beneath the arrogance and performance and carefully rehearsed charm, he finally understood the truth. The wrong woman had just been humiliated in front of the entire tech world. Claire Bennett stepped onto the stage without rushing, without hesitation, and without the slightest trace of fear. The enormous convention hall remained completely silent except for the soft echo of her shoes crossing the polished floor beneath the blue LED lights. Thousands of people watched her move toward the center stage while giant screens projected her image across the auditorium for the first time that night. She looked nothing like the celebrities of the tech world surrounding her. No expensive designer outfit. No media-trained smile. No performance. Just a quiet woman standing beneath lights that were never meant for her. Nathaniel Reed kept one hand calmly wrapped around his microphone, though tension had settled visibly across his face now. "Claire," he said carefully, forcing a polite smile, "this really is not the place for personal grievances." Claire stopped several feet away from him. "This was never personal," she replied softly. Her voice carried through the hall with startling clarity. "It was always about the system." A hush fell across the audience again. Nathaniel laughed lightly, though the sound lacked confidence now. "You left Reed Dynamics 7 years ago," he replied. "Technology evolved." Claire nodded once. "The interface evolved," she corrected quietly. "The architecture did not." Several engineers seated near the front instantly looked back toward the giant display screens. One woman's expression visibly changed as she began rapidly typing on her laptop again. Nathaniel noticed the movement immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, turning toward the audience, "this is exactly why technical systems require context. It is easy to misunderstand isolated metrics without access to full operational infrastructure." Claire never raised her voice. "Then let us use the live system." The room went still again. Nathaniel's smile disappeared completely for the first time all evening. "Excuse me." Claire looked directly toward the massive display behind him. "Run a recursive adaptive load escalation test live." A low murmur spread instantly through the crowd. Engineers exchanged alarmed glances. Investors straightened in their seats. Even several moderators near the stage looked suddenly uncomfortable, because everyone in that room understood exactly what she was asking. Nathaniel shook his head immediately. "That would be irresponsible during a public demonstration." Claire answered without emotion. "Then you already know what happens." The silence deepened. Somewhere near the media section, a camera operator slowly lowered his equipment. Nathaniel stepped closer toward Claire now, speaking more quietly through clenched control. The microphone caught only a little of his voice, but the front rows heard enough. "You think I wanted this timeline?" he whispered. "The investors were squeezing the company from every side. We either shipped or died." For one brief second, he did not sound like a villain. He sounded trapped by the machine he had built around himself. Then the hardness returned to his face. "You are making assumptions based on outdated information." Claire finally looked directly at him. "No," she said calmly. "I am recognizing my own code." The words hit the room like cold water. Several engineers stared openly now. One older developer near the front whispered something under his breath while looking toward Nathaniel with growing disbelief. Claire turned toward the massive display screens. Synchronization latency is increasing every 40 seconds because the recursive memory balancing layer is suppressing fragmentation instead of resolving it. Her voice remained steady, precise. Once the adaptive load crosses the threshold limit, the system begins cannibalizing short-term memory pathways to preserve response continuity. The room had gone completely silent again. Claire continued walking slowly toward the demonstration terminal beneath the white stage lights. That delay, everyone sees as optimization, she asked quietly. It is actually containment. Nathaniel's composure finally cracked for half a second. Enough, he snapped sharply. The sudden edge in his voice startled the audience. Claire stopped beside the terminal calmly. Instead of launching into another explanation, she leaned over the keyboard and typed a single command into the diagnostic terminal. Verify_origin. Memory framework for one breath. Nothing happened. Then the giant screen behind her refreshed in clean white letters. Original architect, Claire Bennett. No speech could have hit harder. No argument could have been cleaner. For one awful second, Nathaniel saw his own reflection in the glossy black surface of the screen, floating directly over the words original architect, Claire Bennett. His face hovered there like a confession he could no longer edit, framed by 7 years of borrowed credit and carefully polished lies. Claire straightened slowly, but she did not speak. She did not point. She did not explain. She simply stood beside the terminal and looked at Nathaniel with an expression that was not hatred. It was pity. The pity of someone who had built something with care, watching the man who stole it finally understand that possession was never the same as creation. The silence stretched across the auditorium until even the live stream comments seemed to hesitate. Nathaniel looked smaller inside it than he had looked beneath any accusation. Only then did Claire speak again. Run the escalation test, she said softly. Or I can explain exactly what your engineers are already seeing. One of the Read Dynamics technicians near the side stage looked physically pale now. Another engineer slowly removed his headset while staring at the diagnostic monitor in front of him. Nathaniel saw it happen. And in that exact moment, the billionaire founder who had controlled the room all night realized something horrifying. The audience was no longer listening to him. They were listening to her. The atmosphere inside the convention hall had transformed completely. What began as a polished billionaire keynote now felt like a corporate trial unfolding live beneath cold blue lights and silent camera drones. Nathaniel Reed stood frozen near center stage, while Claire Bennett remained beside the demonstration terminal with calm precision written across her face. Around them, thousands of attendees sat motionless, watching the balance of power shift in real time. The giant LED screens continued displaying streams of glowing system data, while Read Dynamics engineers whispered urgently into headsets near the side stage. One technician looked toward Nathaniel uncertainly. "Sir," he said quietly, though his microphone accidentally carried across the speakers. "The synchronization drift is increasing." The room reacted instantly. A wave of whispers rippled through the audience. Nathaniel turned sharply toward the engineering section. "Stabilize it," he ordered. But the confidence in his voice had started cracking now. Claire looked toward the display screens without emotion. "The adaptive recursion threshold is already compromised," she said calmly. "You cannot stabilize it by suppressing memory fragmentation." Several engineers visibly stiffened because they knew she was right. One younger programmer opened diagnostic logs on his laptop and suddenly stared at the screen in disbelief. The timestamp patterns matched exactly what Claire had described. Nathaniel pointed aggressively toward the terminal. "Run a visual reset," he snapped toward his team. Fingers moved rapidly across keyboards. The giant display flickered briefly as the live AI interface refreshed itself. For one hopeful second, the synchronization metrics appeared to steady. Nathaniel immediately seized the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced quickly, forcing confidence back into his posture. "This is exactly why live systems require active calibration during demonstrations." The words sounded broad, impressive, and almost meaningless. But the engineers were no longer speaking his language. "That was not calibration," one developer near the front said under her breath, though the microphone beside her caught it. "That was suppression." Another engineer leaned toward his colleague. "Check the fragmentation curve. She was right about the adaptive recursion threshold. The vocabulary in the room had changed. Nathaniel was still selling vision. The engineers were now testing truth. A few uncertain claps echoed weakly through the room. Claire quietly shook her head once. "You delayed it," she said softly. "You did not fix it." Nathaniel ignored her completely. "Activate expanded adaptive load," he ordered his engineers. Gasps spread through the technical audience immediately. One senior engineer looked genuinely alarmed. "Sir," he whispered, "that could accelerate the recursion instability." Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice sharply. "Do it." The engineer hesitated for one fatal second before pressing the command. The giant screens behind the stage exploded with streams of moving data as the system load increased dramatically. Neural visualization patterns pulsed brighter across the auditorium walls while the artificial intelligence processed larger adaptive requests in real time. At first, the system appeared stable again. Nathaniel smiled triumphantly toward the crowd. "There," he said confidently. "Perfectly operational." Then the delays began. Tiny at first. Half a second. Then 1 second. Audience prompts started repeating themselves on screen. Responses looped strangely before correcting. Several engineers stopped breathing entirely while staring at their monitors. Claire remained perfectly still beside the terminal. "The memory balancing layer is cannibalizing itself now," she said quietly. Nobody laughed this time. A warning symbol suddenly flashed red across one side monitor before disappearing. Then another appeared. Then 3 more. Nathaniel's face lost all color. "Reset the adaptive queue," he barked. "Now." His engineers scrambled frantically across keyboards. But the system had already crossed the threshold. The giant LED display flickered violently once before freezing altogether. Thousands of people stared upward in stunned silence as the artificial intelligence interface began outputting fragmented responses across the massive screens. Memory conflict detected. Recursive collapse warning. Response architecture failure. A loud system tone echoed through the convention hall. One monitor near the side. Stage went completely black. Then another. The room had gone absolutely silent now except for the soft hum of overloaded processors beneath the stage floor. Nathaniel stood motionless beneath the white spotlight, staring at the collapsing system around him like a man watching his empire crack open in public. Claire slowly looked toward the audience. "This is why the safeguards mattered," she said quietly. Somewhere near the front rows, one investor whispered in disbelief. She tried to warn him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And beneath the cold blue glow of the failing screens, the most powerful man in the tech world suddenly looked very small. The convention hall remained frozen beneath the glow of broken blue screens, while warning messages continued flashing across the giant displays above the stage. The polished image Reed Dynamics had spent years building was collapsing live in front of investors, journalists, engineers, and millions of livestream viewers across the country. Nobody reached for applause anymore. Nobody checked their phones. Even the influencers who had spent the evening chasing viral moments now stood speechless beneath the cold convention lights. Nathaniel Reed stared at the failing system with the hollow expression of a man realizing too late that confidence could not override reality. Around him, Reed Dynamics engineers scrambled desperately behind glowing monitors while fragmented error messages continued appearing faster than they could suppress them. One technician quietly removed his headset and sat down heavily without saying a word. Another simply stared at Claire Bennett like he had just seen a ghost walk out of history. Claire herself remained calm beside the demonstration terminal. No triumph, no anger, no satisfaction. Only a tired stillness in her eyes that came from watching a disaster she had predicted years earlier finally arrive exactly the way she feared it would. Nathaniel slowly turned toward her. For the first time all night, the performance was gone. No charm, no rehearsed confidence, no billionaire polish. Just a man standing in the ruins of his own arrogance beneath thousands of watching eyes. "You could have contacted us privately," he said quietly. The words sounded almost desperate now. Claire looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I tried." The silence that followed cut deeper than any accusation could have. Several older engineers lowered their eyes immediately because they remembered those emails years ago. The warnings, the reports, the meetings nobody wanted investors to hear about. Nathaniel swallowed hard as realization spread visibly across the room. Claire had never come there for revenge. She had come because the system was dangerous, and he had mocked her publicly instead of listening. One journalist near the front slowly stood and asked the question nobody else wanted to say aloud. Did Reed Dynamics remove the original safety architecture? Nathaniel did not answer. He could not, because the screens behind him were already answering for him. Claire stepped quietly toward the center of the stage while cameras followed her across the silent auditorium. She looked out at the crowd of executives, founders, engineers, and aspiring entrepreneurs who had spent the evening worshiping confidence without once questioning integrity. Behind her, the damaged system released a broken warning tone, then another, each sound thin and uneven, like the final breath of a machine that had been forced to lie for too long. Technology is not dangerous because it is intelligent, she said softly, her voice moving through the gaps between the dying system tones. It becomes dangerous when people value power more than responsibility. Nobody moved. The room had gone completely still again, except for those fractured electronic pulses echoing under her warning. Claire glanced once toward the frozen system display before continuing. The safeguards slowed profits down, so they removed them. A ripple of discomfort spread visibly through the audience. Investors shifted uneasily in their seats. Several executives avoided eye contact entirely, because every person in that room understood the truth hidden beneath her words. This was never just about one system. It was about what happened when ambition stopped respecting limits. Claire reached up calmly and removed the temporary visitor badge hanging from her cardigan. Then she placed it quietly beside the broken terminal. You mocked the only person in this room who was trying to protect you, she said. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. He had no response left. Claire turned and walked toward the stage stairs beneath the cold blue lights, while thousands of people watched her in absolute silence. No security stopped her. No moderator interrupted her. Even the camera drones seemed slower now, almost careful, as though the entire building understood something important had just happened. One by one, the drones that had circled Nathaniel all evening lowered from above him. Their lenses stopped searching for his face. They tilted away from the billionaire in the spotlight and slowly turned toward the visitor badge Claire had left on the table. Near the exit doors, a young female engineer stood waiting silently with tears in her eyes. Claire passed her gently. The young engineer whispered only 4 words. Thank you for staying honest. Claire gave a faint nod before disappearing beyond the glass doors into the cool San Francisco night. For a moment, the young engineer remained where she was. Then she looked back toward the stage, walked quietly to the broken terminal, and picked up the visitor badge Claire had left behind. She held it in both hands like something heavier than plastic. Not a souvenir, a reminder. Behind her, the giant conference hall remained silent long after Claire left. On the main screen, beneath the frozen warning messages, one small line still remained visible beside her name. Original architect. And that night, the tech world remembered something arrogance always forgets. The loudest person in the room is not always the smartest. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the truth everyone else is too afraid to hear.